The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, improve compliance and audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys.
It's time to rethink how we approach cybersecurity because the reality is modern cyber attackers are already past your initial defenses. ExtraHop helps your security team find and eradicate advanced threats before real damage is done. Protect your enterprise and customers with better defense. Learn more about how ExtraHop stops advanced threats at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. That's extra HOP.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque and Tyler Robinson. Don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical trainings by visiting securityweekly.com/on-demand. Also, don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. All right, gentlemen, articles for the week. I started with some really interesting kind of high-level kind of executive articles, right? This first article is how the board perceives the CEO and how they're going to drive initiatives in 2023. And so I thought this was a little interesting, right? Because it says boards looking to CEOs, not CIOs, to lead digital initiatives, because we think about these digital transformation projects as being headed up by the CIO, the CTO, but more and more the boards are saying, nope, this is now the CEO's responsibility. This is part of their job profile going forward, which is interesting because it's shifted the responsibility in some of these digital initiatives to the CEO themselves versus looking to some of the other technology folks in the organization.
Yeah,
so
I mean, at the end of the day, Matt, every business is a digital business, right? So
yeah.
it was just a natural progression of responsibility that the CEO is going to have, as well as, managing the revenue coming into the organization, the finances of the organization. Every business is a digital business these days. So, of course, yeah, I think it's a natural progression for the CEO and the board of directors to have that as an expectation now.
Yeah, and
Is that a good shift though? That's the question, because we're already short on CISOs, right? Like, and CISOs aren't really wanting to take those roles. CTOs are a little bit leery because of liability, and now we're pushing a business entity in a business onto someone that is not as adept to the technological side and the nuance of security. So, isn't that the role of the CIO and or CTO?
Yeah, I think it's what the CEO does with it, right? If the CEO brings in someone who's a high-level advisor, can advise them in the right direction. At the end of the day, I don't expect every CEO to be a financial wizard as well, right? But they bring in a CFO. So, as long as they have the right folks on their team, I think they can be successful. If they feel like they can, take the reins and take over IT initiatives and IT strategy, I think that's the wrong position. But should they be accountable and responsible for it? Yes.
yeah, I think that's right. What I found interesting is the risk appetite change also in this article is that 2/3 of boards of directors are planning to increase their risk appetite through 2024. Now balance that with the economic condition that we're in, right? So think about this for a second, right? We're in high interest rate environment. We're seeing some slowdown in investment. We just did security money last week, but boards are willing to take on more risk through 2024. Like, I think it puts not only the CEO, but all the executives in an interesting position of, as this risk appetite grows, like, how do you mitigate potential impact and downstream initiatives? Tyler, back to your point, like, what about the CTO, the CIO, and the CISO in those roles? And what if I don't have the right people in those roles? Am I taking on more risk than I'm prepared for? It was kind of the thing that was going off in my head.
I mean, with every disruption, I think it's opportunity, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the more that the board expects these responsibilities to be on the shoulders of the C-suite, the more accountability they feel they have. I think the more they can lean into it, right? We've been praying for the day that cybersecurity would become that shared responsibility that we always talk about. Well, how do you change habits? How do you change the way people react? Is you put accountability on the table. Guess what? If the CEO is now accountable for technology and digital transformation, they'll now be accountable for digital risk. When they're accountable for digital risk, it's going to motivate them to have the C-suite on board to help assess that risk. I think this is opportunity if done correctly.
Agreed.
I think you'll see a transition, though. I believe there will be those that transition well and those that do not transition well. So you're going to have those companies in which you'll either see someone dragging them along, or you'll see a CEO that is dragging them through the mud to get to the point where they have to get, or you'll have the progressive side of that. So you kind of have to know your audience, know your board, and trust your leadership while offering them some insight.
It'll become the business version of survival of the fittest, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Yeah, we'll have to correlate this data result and set to the breaches over the next year and a half to 2 years and see what happens, right? Like those who took more risk but weren't prepared to actually have the staff to mitigate that risk, how many got breached. But this ties into the second article, which is over 35% of CFOs say cybersecurity is among their highest concerns. More than half are deeply involved in their company's cyber risk response and strategies. That's a very good thing, right, Jason? Because now the CFOs who hold the purse strings are now seeing cybersecurity risk in the equation, and it's now front and center with the CFOs.
Yeah, and again, people's views are changing because of accountability coming to the table. CFOs are becoming more and more accountable for these digital risks that are being presented, right? So now they're forced to focus on what those remediations are to mitigate the risk. It's the evolution. Once you have responsibility and accountability, you're going to make changes in your overall strategy. So I feel like this is a good thing, right? I feel like it's something that can take us in a positive direction.
Yeah,
as much as I hate the FUD too, like I think ransomware has helped drive some of this initiative. We've quantified dollar amounts to business digital asset risks, and I think that, as horrible as it was a necessary evil that has progressed the executive and leadership board to pay attention.
Yeah, and to your point, Tyler, it's not the CIO who's getting the letter that says you no longer have cyber liability insurance. It's the CFO. That's who's getting that letter and reading that letter.
Yes. The scariest stat in here, though, is despite more than a third, 34% of CFOs admitting they don't have an existing solution to comply with cybersecurity regulations, 85 of those respondents express confidence that they can prevent cybersecurity attacks. That's a pretty big disconnect.
Yeah, totally. And I pulled some other bullets out of there too, right? They talked about where they're looking to invest, and they're looking to invest in promoting efficiency, collaboration across organizations, enhancing decision-making capabilities, and improving customer experience. I didn't see cybersecurity investment in there anywhere.
All right.
So that's another piece that I pulled out there. I said, wait a minute, where's the cyber risk and digital risk management line item in here?
Right. Yeah. If a third say they have the systems, where's the investment going to fill that gap?
Yeah. Right. And then the other piece that I pulled out too was top leadership skills and strengths for CFO. It was people skills, operational management, technology, digital solutions, transformation, and so on. There was no risk in there, risk management in there, or cybersecurity acumen in that list whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah. Thus,
maybe it was an optional.
Yeah, optional. Yeah. Thus, Article 3, the responsibility of the C-suite, why cybersecurity starts in the C-suite. And it brings all the executives together in this article. But to your point, Jason, right, we see the gaps in the previous couple stats, and then you come to this article, and it's like, okay, well, we know that, but what do you actually do about it? And so this is where the alignment across the C-suite has to start to happen. And I think this is where we still have a big gap, is because if we were getting that alignment across the board, wouldn't we see more investment going into security and risk initiatives to support the digital initiatives, to fill the gaps in where security is not being addressed? But I think this is where the gap is.
Right. I mean, so this article, it was one of those love-hate relationships with this article, because I think the concept of what the author was trying to achieve is okay. I think the, coming down with a hammer was the wrong way, because they're basically saying that as a C-level executive, you need to master the skills of cybersecurity, master the skills of risk management. I don't believe that whatsoever. I think you need to be open to it. I think you need to listen. I think you need to make decisions based on those folks who master these skills. But to think that I'm a chief marketing officer and I need to be a master of cybersecurity risk management, it's baloney, right? There's no way. That means you're not focusing on marketing the company. So that's not what I want. What I want are executives who are open to the conversation, open to outcomes, open to solutions, who will listen to me as a subject matter expert, just like I listen to them as subject matter experts, and we work together on outcomes. So I think the stance here was a little too tough, a little overboard, a little over the top, because those other executives should never, ever become masters in these domains. Why would I have a job as a CISO if they're masters in those, or chief risk officer if they're masters in that domain? I don't agree with that part of it.
Yeah, I think it's 4 and 5. Points 4 and 5 are really where you want the rest of the C-suite, right? It's creating that culture of cybersecurity, starting from the top and coming down through the entire organization, right? That's where I think the C-suite can play a very vital role, is that positive cybersecurity culture, working with each of the teams to express the importance of this and why they're doing the things they're doing. So I think culture is one thing that the C-suite can do without necessarily getting in the weeds of all the cybersecurity nuts and bolts. The second one is then making sure that stuff is getting prioritized from a budget perspective. What does marketing need? What does HR need? What does, right? And are we aligning on priorities and budgets to do that in a more secure way? And so I think 4 and 5 were much more relevant to the broader C-suite than the first 3, which were kind of, to your point, like master cybersecurity and everything, right?
100%. I mean, at the end of the day, they're business stakeholders, right? Who have a voice in the strategy and the decisions we're making, right? They're part of the stakeholder group. I equate it back to, let's go, rewind 20 years ago with technology. We never expected our C-suite to become technology experts. What we expected them to be would be good stewards and stakeholders in our technology strategy.
The last 2 are the only ones that, from the standpoint of like a director or a VP, even a CISO, those are the ones that you do not directly have the power to manipulate and or do anything about. And so if you're going to empower your organization, you have to be the one to do those 2 if you're the executive on those 2. The other ones, you really do need to be relying on the experts that have decades of experience in understanding the common language of cybersecurity. Like, yeah, it's great to be familiar with those, but let's be real, like, zero trust from what you are going to find out and understand at a high level is not going to help your organization in any way, shape, or form. That's so leave that to the experts and leverage your team that has the understanding to do those things.
Dead on, Tyler. It's our job to translate that back to the business. They need to be accepting of that information and work with us on strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. So some good news, I think. Compensation for cybersecurity leaders is on the rise. And I think this is all before the events over the last couple weeks.
That was what I'm like, wait a minute, what motivated this article? Everybody's afraid they're not going to be able to hire a CISO now.
Right. Exactly right. So the timing of this...
You're not wrong.
Right. The timing's interesting, right? Chief Information Security Officer saw a 15% increase in compensation over the last year. So it's Ein's research with an executive search company called Article that did the survey over the last year. 15% above kind of inflation, which is sitting at 8.5%, right? So this is above the inflation rate. So there's not an inflation adjustment. But I think the timing of this is pretty interesting, right? Is because after the whole, all the issues around Joe Sullivan and all that stuff, right? Like, I think organizations are going to have a tougher time finding CISOs. So get this article. Like, look, you can make close to $500,000 as a CISO now in the industry. And if you're in those top earners, upwards of 2 million. Look, I'll tell you right now, if anybody who wants me to be a CISO, it's fine. It's a 7-figure discussion right now. Right?
No,
like, that's
at the end of the day, I was going to say, I don't care how many zeros you put after that. We're still talking about my contract, and we're still talking about liability language, and we're still talking about officers and directors insurance. It's not going to change those conversations,
right?
But you can add as many zeros as you want.
Right. Exactly right. Yes. It's just, I was like, well, look, the industry's getting a raise, yay! Right at the time when
but now you can be charged with a crime and go to jail. Woo!
Right. Thanks. Yes. Anyway, so it was just very, very interesting. It also breaks down kind of the cash component versus stock and some other things, which is kind of interesting, right? I mean, having been in the startup world for a long time, I'm used to equity is a big component of compensation, which is something I want, right? Because I want skin in the game. May or may not have been the same case for others. And so they do talk about some of the breakdowns of cash and equity and some of the other things that are in here, which is interesting because I think it's, as more and more companies, go into the public spotlight, there's potential rewards and gains with that other executives get as part of their executive package. Why not the CISO? And I think you're going to have to find ways to continue to compensate CISOs and get them to buy into the overall strategy of the organization, especially these days.
Yeah, and I mean that's a good point for the listeners, right? If you're going into a leadership role, don't just look at the salary. Look at everything else that comes with it, right? Do you get equity? Do you get a compensation plan based on performance? Like, look at all those other pieces as well, because it's one big full package, and just know it's not just that salary that you're negotiating for.
Right.
I think the other interesting part on the CISO role is its dynamic of needing to be a hybrid worker. He has to be able to go in and meet with the board, the executives. The remote meetings are happening, but at the same time with the shareholders and stakeholders, I see the executive suite having a lot less freedom, especially if the organization itself is pushed back on the work from home like 100%. They have to be that kind of leader by example. So that's another thing you do have to consider as the landscape is starting to shift back to the work from home and the freedom that you get from that as an executive.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. The 3 cloud security posture questions CISOs should ask. Now, I brought this article in because article number 1 talks about the digital innovation side, right? So I'm trying to tie these together. So the CEO taking more responsibility for digital initiatives, cloud being a big driver of that. There's a gap or potentially a gap, right, in the CIO, CTO, CISO participation, some of these questions. So I'm like, well, this is an interesting way to think about it. If I'm a CISO and we're pushing more and more stuff into the cloud, are we ready? And it brings in this whole concept of risk appetite again, right? Which ties to article number 2, which we saw the board of directors willing to take on more risk, have more of a risk appetite to drive opportunities in this environment right now. And so how does all that align? If the CEO is driving us to cloud initiatives, the board is willing to take on more risk appetite. The first question that gets popped up in this article is, does your risk appetite align to your strategy? Like, it's a very simple question. Like, CISOs, is there alignment here with your board on the risk appetite and all these digital initiatives to drive strategy into the cloud?
And you want to know what? I've worked with lots of CEOs in my career, right? And we all know that the strength of a CEO is being the visionary, the evangelist, out there evangelizing for the company. Some of the things we know about CEOs, too, is that they like knee-jerk reaction and get things done fast and go, 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 right? We know that. Is this the way you want to go, 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 go? I don't think so, right? This is where having operational folks on the back end who are that yin and yang to the CEO is going to come into play. This is going to be the success of your organization. Perfect example, and I have this example. Company wants to move to the cloud. They want to put all of their on-prem physical assets up in the cloud. All right, we're going to go out. We're going to buy these licensing. We're going to start doing a migration. Epiphany moment hits. Wait a minute. I have FedRAMP and CJIS regulation that I need to adhere to, comply to. Whoa, rewind. Now everything needs to be redone because now you need GovCloud, right? So that's the perfect example of wasting cycles, wasting time, knee-jerk reaction, go, 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 when it should have been a little bit of patience, build out the strategy, realize where those pitfalls are, where that friction is going to be, do it right the first time, right? So looking at regulatory compliance, looking at that landscape, making sure you have those subject matter experts out there who can look at the environment you're going to migrate to and does it fit your organization? I mean, that's why you need that subject matter expert.
That's the important part. We've seen the big shift to the cloud already once, right? Like we've seen everybody try and adopt the cloud's the next big thing. Then they get their first bill, or the first migration doesn't happen in the way they think it does. And now 5 years later, we're in a hybrid situation. You almost cannot do a full migration to the cloud without some sort of hybrid, just because of the way that we've kind of migrated the technology and the stack. And then really the biggest thing, like, it's not really necessarily, it's who you want to pay. Do you want to have in-house? Do you have the expertise? Do you have the resources in-house already? Now, if those resources want to learn and move and adapt to the cloud, great. Now you have those resources that can double stack and do double duty. But if you don't, the cloud is a very dangerous place from a security standpoint, that without the right resources, you're going to end up in a world of hurt. So I don't see anybody just getting in the wrong.
Tyler, to your point, what are the two big aspects that most organizations get compromised because of? The human factor and misconfiguration. Well, guess what? Guess what cloud's ripe with? Misconfiguration, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly right. See, that's where point number 2 comes in with maturity of your program. Like, are you ready from a security maturity perspective to move into the cloud? Because you brought it up, Tyler, right? It starts as hybrid. So I've got certain controls on-prem. Do those same controls work in the cloud or don't they? How am I going to migrate those controls to the cloud? Am I doing cloud security differently versus an organization that went all in on cloud? Now, we're 100% cloud. We're leveraging a ton of stuff from from AWS, which is awesome, right? But not every organization gets to start in the cloud and go all cloud from day one. And some of them don't even get to stay in one cloud. Sometimes they have to deal with multiple clouds, right? So there's a lot of issues from the different types of controls and the different environments that have to be addressed in your security program. Are you mature enough to be able to handle those? And then that ties into number 3, which is the whole concept of shift left, right? Because we're a cloud first organization, we think about this from day one, right? Everything is infrastructure as code for us. Everything is all templatized, so it makes it really easy for us. But that's a shift organizations are still managing. The development side of the house plays a much bigger role going forward in your security program than they did in the past, because they have the ability to push changes and push code and push infrastructure into the cloud like never before. That's a completely different mindset than an old kind of traditional on-prem security model.
100%. And I mean, we're in a day now where your traditional infrastructure or network engineers are now managing in GitHub. They're application developers now, because they're dealing with SD-WAN. 5-6 years ago, when I had a technical director come to me and say, "Hey, listen, I need a GitHub license," and I'm like, "What do you need a GitHub license for?" "Wow, SD-WAN, man. I'm building code now." I'm like, "Here we go, right? Application developers going to rule the world," and we knew it. So, that's where we're at. And you're absolutely correct. We have to shift left as much as possible. And I mean, even from the automation and orchestration side, start automating and orchestrating as much as you possibly can. Shift that left. So that way, your staff are doing the more strategic type initiatives and tasks.
And as a leader, you have to understand each one of your departments and understand their full capability. And that means a relationship, because you may have an IT or an infrastructure team that is very cloud focused, very cloud savvy. However, your DevOps team may not fully get the ramifications of configuration and testing environments and the security implications of how they're managing and leveraging the cloud that's being provided to them, which is where you end up with misconfigurations or open buckets or all the things that can go wrong from a cloud cloud standpoint that's, publicly facing the internet. So those are things as a leader, you have to really be honest with yourself and understand the different departments a little bit better as far as their capability and aspirations.
Yep, absolutely. All right, we're going to go into a couple communications articles. Now, I cover a lot of Harvard Business Review articles. This was a very interesting article. I pulled it in because, number one, I report to a female CEO, like our co-founder, Ashley Rose, a woman. And I found this article extremely fascinating. Half of our executive team are women. I've worked for multiple women leaders, and I was reading this article, and I was actually shocked at this concept of confidence and how it's weaponized against women at work. And I didn't realize, because I've never seen this really in my experience, because like I said, I've worked with and for so many women in my career. I never saw this issue. But I wanted to bring it forward because I think it's an interesting for leaders to understand that there are these issues in the workplace that sometimes we don't see them, but they're happening like under the covers. And I wanted to bring this one forward, for example. And I didn't want to get into all the back end. I was thinking more about like as leaders, how do we move forward? How do we eliminate gender biases in the workplace as leaders? And so I want to spend a little more time focusing on the recommendations for what leaders can do. But obviously, Jason and Tyler, would love your thoughts on this one.
I'm in the same boat as you, Matt. I mean, I've worked for and with very successful executives who were women over the course of my entire career. I also was lucky enough to work for organizations who valued things, and it's one of the recommendations here, of vulnerability. We had boards and leaders who said, you want to know what? We're human. We're not perfect. We're going to make mistakes. You can be vulnerable. You can admit mistakes. It's okay to raise your hand. It's okay to say something's wrong, right? So I worked for very, very employee-focused organizations for the majority of my career as well. So I was very surprised, just like you. But I think that's one place where, if we can take the guard down a little bit, I think that number two is very important to me personally, because we are all human. Nobody is perfect. Being able to open up and show vulnerability, I think, is a good trait for leaders. And I think it's a good model to push down to your entire staff that it's okay. It's okay to raise your hand if something's wrong. It's okay to, to have that confidence crisis and open up and talk about it. It's okay for these certain things to be happening in the workplace, and we'll work through it together because we're all human.
Right. So to Jason's point, so the first recommendation was declaring a moratorium on the word confidence and getting it out of the environment. Number two is value and vulnerability, which is what Jason was really talking about, right? In a more diverse workforce, people having understanding and embracing vulnerability and understanding that we're all human, we make mistakes, et cetera, which I think is exactly right, because that's the way I've always thought about it, Jason. Right? I've always thought about it as vulnerability and empathy and understanding not only your leadership but also your employees, and not ever thinking about from a confidence perspective. What I thought was this last one is just this concept of redesigning your training programs. So I guess there are. I've never seen these because I've never focused on these, but there's like gender specific training courses around this. Like, why would you do that? I just, when I work with my staff, for example, because I have my staff doing their career planning for next year, I don't look at my staff by gender and have them look at specific courses. Agreed. Right? All of them are available. What's the best fit for what you're trying to do is part of your overall training and your career growth. I never bring gender into it. So to have programs that are specifically women only or to a specific gender just never made sense to me. Never even knew they existed, actually.
I think a lot of that is that's because we've worked in places that have that good diversity, that have that respect. And at the end of the day, like, just be a good damn human, right? Like, if you don't see the gender, you can recognize and empathize with the problems that they have and the hardships that they're dealing with, but also treat them as an individual and not as a gender. Like, why are we segmenting and segregating when I would never take a stance against that, and then you end up overcompensating and making it awkward for both sides of this. And that's where you end up with having to be over dominant, over assertive, all the things that they don't want to have to do, that is not necessarily their personality, and they're having to do it in order to make a statement. So let's just make everyone comfortable and do this correctly and treat people as individuals.
Agreed. So for number one, declaring a moratorium or a war on a word, I don't think that's the solution, right? Maybe the perspective of what confidence is has gone off the rails, and we need to kind of bring that back and really talk through what that means. Okay, I can handle that, but saying that we don't want to use the word confidence anymore, absolutely no way. And then number three for me is, to Tyler's point, why are we driving wedges in between people when we should be bringing everybody together, right? The way to fix these problems isn't to create more silos, it's to break down the silos and break down the walls. We don't need more walls between us. What we need is more people together talking about solutions and outcomes that benefits everyone. So absolutely dead on, Tyler.
That's why I brought in the last article. We don't have a ton of time to cover it, but it starts with communication. And so I brought in, again, Science of People article around improving your interpersonal communication skills. Because again, this is about communication and how you communicate with other people. So I pulled this article in right at the end just for some tips for people who want to know how to have a better conversation with their peers, their colleagues, etc., and improve on that communication. Because to your point, why would we want to drive a wedge in between the different people in the organization? We should be treating everybody the same. We should be communicating consistently in the same way. So I just threw that article in at the end for a way for us to go back and look at how how do we practice good communication skills?
100%. And honestly, Matt, I love this article. There are some of those tips that were in there were awesome. And not only am I going to share this with my staff and future leaders within the organization, I'm going to go back and do a little auditing of myself just to make sure I'm still on point. Do you know what I mean? Like, as technologists and as engineers growing up in the industry, I noticed, number 5 was do an email audit. See how good your written communication is. A lot of times, folks that have that engineering mind are super curt and fast, ones and zeros, light switch on and off, right?
Yep.
And it's, I need this, I need that, thanks, bye, right? Where you need
cold.
Right, that's it. And you gotta get you gotta put a little bit more emotion in it. You gotta put a little bit more, just a little bit more feeling into it, and. That's one place that engineering teams, the technologists, I think, can work a little bit better, where they, you can.
I think that goes.
Go ahead, Ted.
That goes both ways from a communication standpoint, though, right? Like when you're receiving these emails, make sure you're not having that preemptive prejudgment on this is a very cold email. They don't like me. That put a bunch of emotion or mindset behind that. Really take things for what they are, and then if you do have questions or you are unsure or unclear about something, just ask. That's part of the inner communication and communication piece there, being able to openly communicate with people and ask questions if you are unsure rather than assume. That's the easiest piece of advice you can get from any leader is just ask me. If you thought that's what I meant and it's not very nice, like ask me, and if that's what I meant, then we can talk through it. If that's not what I meant, then we'll clear it out. Done.
And the other side too is model the way, right? So a lot of times I'll pick up on those curt, quick communications that I know aren't meant to be a bad thing. Right. So I'll get, a message in chat and, I'll lead off my conversation with, well, good morning. How are you today? Right. Versus the cold, quick. And I try to lead by example. Then all of a sudden you get the person who it clicks and they're like, oh my God, good morning. I'm so sorry. You know what I mean? Like, and now the social side of the conversation is picking up again. So model the way, model that way and lead by example for your staff.
Well, and plus we're on Zoom calls all day long throughout different times of the day, like good morning, good afternoon, like simple things. Like the reason I put some of these articles in here, they're good. You said it, Jason, right? It's a good way to audit yourself. Like, wait, did I forget about that? Like, should I practice more about this? It's not only for our audience. Sometimes these are really good checkpoints for ourselves.
Yeah. And I mean, just doing research and staying up on leadership skills. That people are going to judge you in certain ways, right? If you meet someone for the first time, they're going to look at you first, right? They're going to look at your appearance. Then you're going to have that verbal side of the aisle where now they're looking at you and they're making a perception of you, and it's how you handle yourself. You want to make sure, because those two things end up turning into their initial belief about who you are as a person, right? So you want to make sure that you're very strong in those areas. So that way, you're able to have those good business relationships and in relationships with people in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, that nonverbal, that's an important thing from a leader. I've pushed a lot of my leadership to turn your damn camera on, because guess what? I know what you're saying and I know how you're feeling, but that's not coming across in your voice. Like, there's a lot of nonverbals. Look at these two on camera here. They're fantastic. They got some smiles, some nods, some nonverbals, all the things that you need the affirmation from that we're missing from in person. This work from home life is very difficult. So keeping that connection and eye contact and human relation together is very difficult, and it needs to be done now.
Yes, agreed. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Thank you everyone for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.